Welcome, everybody. By the way, this is my AI contribution to the event. I generated something that generated this image. Uh, Usually, talks start with audience interaction, so I'll do the same. Who has installed version 13 already? Except from the developers who have been working on it, of course. Okay, that's quite a few people. Well, Olivier had to talk about some of the new features in the API. I had some of those features in my slides, so I was working last night on changing the presentation a bit. But I'll try to cover most of the other stuff. The mandatory slide about yourself. I'm the TYPO3 developer at MacServe and been working with TYPO3 quite long. And I do the Dutch translation of all the core labels. And I have quite a few dogs in my home. I brought some pictures in the presentation, not of my own dogs, but some of them that I know with their actual names in them, just because they were kind of funny for the rest of the presentation, but you'll see. There are a huge number of slides because there is so much done in version 13. So I'll try to move quickly through the stuff and hope that we have some time at the end for questions and stuff like that. I'm gonna upload the whole slides stuff to a few things at the end, so that you don't have to write along with me. You can read everything later. For the front end, there seems to be not much change if you look at my slides, but that's because most of the stuff was in TypoScript and Fluid. So this is the one that didn't belong in those categories. If you have an error, the request ID is now in the error message. That's quite handy because you can ask your customers to send you that, and then you can look it up in the log and know what actually went wrong without having to reproduce it. That ends the front end section. There were a few more slides in it, but those were killed because of time restrictions. So let's see what TypoScript and tsconfig have new. There's a new operator in TypoScript. The PHP guys here know him quite well. The name is quite hard for some people, null coalescing operator. It actually means that it checks variables if they are empty or not. And the first one that is not empty, that is used. Use case is that you have old settings and now want to use new settings, then you can just use the new setting, use the operator, and put the old setting name behind it, and everything is still working. Yeah, for PHP guys, it's familiar, and they will probably be happy that it is in TypeScript too. Application context was already available in conditions, and you can now also use it as data for an if statement or something. The tsconfig now allows you to set the default view mode for the file list module. You can switch between tiles and list, and yeah, some people don't want the tiles by default, and so you can set it for a project. Also, the default search level in the list module can be set. You could already set a list of the possible items, but now it's also possible to use the default. These were already mentioned a bit, but I added some screenshots that you can see what the effect is. You can define download presets in tsconfig. That's handy if you have people who have to download some records regularly and want a certain number of fields in them. Then they can use a preset like in the list module You can select one. You see the my preset one that I just defined. And then it's just hit the download button and you're ready. There was a little bit of a problem with caching for resources that were defined in a different way. If you use assets point to static files and you change that file, then that file is often cached by browsers. And the same cache busting technique that we're used to, like adding something to the query string or something in the file name, depending on the settings in the install tool, is now applied to those static resources. And this is a tiny one. If you are working on the configuration for RTE fields, then you always have to define which tags are allowed or denied. And you may actually now remove them because we trust the HTML sanitizer anyway. Yeah, if you want to exclude or explicitly deny, allow some tags, you can still use it, but it's not mandatory anymore. There were a few nice features for the command line. You can now clean up your local processed files in one command. That's always nice if you're working on storages and stuff like that. And yeah, well, this is not what you use in the production environment, of course, but while developing, it's sometimes nice if you work on those features. Maybe if you've seen in the install tool that you can now define some users and user groups by default. It is a bit limited yet, but yeah, it will probably be expanded in future versions. There are two default groups now, an editor and an advanced editor. And if you've not created them in the install tool and you still want to use that, there is a command line option for it. And another nice one that's a bit between Fluid and command line. You can now use a command to generate the Fluid schemes of all view helpers in your current installation and use that XID file in your favorite IDE, for example, PHP Storm, to make autocomplete better. The backend, that was a section where a lot of changes have happened. I don't know if you use forms or if you're a fan of PowerMail. It seems to be a bit of a religious thing between some people. But anyway, the core only gives features for forms. The autocomplete option in form fields can now be set by the editor. If they define a form, they have a drop-down option with all relevant autocomplete options. You can turn it off or use one of the. Thought someone was asking a question, but it was something else. If you have a lot of forms in your installation, then you can also search for them and sort them on various fields. Yeah, with 2 forms, it's not that useful, but it would take too much time to create 50 forms just for the screenshot. Let's make some more backend users happy. The dog is called Happy, actually. Redirects. That is also in the core for quite a while, and it can be a big mess. Redirects can be invalid over time and stuff like that. There is a scheduled task to check the redirects, and the status in the reports module has now been improved. You can see that there are conflicting redirects, and if they were checked in the last 24 hours, so you can see what's the new stuff that has to be checked in the redirects. And that integrity status after the check is also stored, and you can search for it, filter for it, and have a command line thing. Yeah, there was another one for the command line sheets, but yeah, it was in two places. You can clean up your the remove directs based on that status, so you can clean up a lot of invalid redirects. In the redirects module, it looks a bit like that. There's an extra filter for the integrity status, and the ones that were failed are shown up in red. So that helps a bit cleaning up that mess. Don't know if you have a lot of redirects in installations, but I've come across installations with so many redirects that I can't have any overview. So this would probably help with cleaning up that big mess. Live search, the little search thing in the upper right corner, also has new features. You can search for modules that you have access to. So if an editor knows a bit about the name of a module but doesn't know where to find it, you can search for it. And if there are many workspaces in your installation, you can also search for them. The file list also has a few new features. If you select a file or few files, you can directly add the metadata for those files. And if you have a remote, like a YouTube or Vimeo movie in your file list, then you can reload the remote metadata directly from YouTube or Vimeo, so that your file has the latest data from that source. I don't know if you use a lot the history and rollback options, then you always see what's different between the various versions. But if you have a FlexForm field there, it was quite a mess. And they've been working hard on improving that. It's, not a earth-moving change, but at least now you can read like key value pairs and what has been changed. The FlexForm is actually parsed with the correct definition and ends up with these sets of keys and values. It looks a lot better if you have to see what someone has changed in the FlexForm. Oliver quickly mentioned that there was now a hotkey API. It's in JavaScript, a lot of stuff, and I'm not good at JavaScript at all, so I can't help you how to define a hotkey. Look in now the RST files, and it probably ends up in the documentation too. But there are a few predefined ones. Control NK or Command NK for the live search, and the often requested one, Control and S to save documents, both in Form Engine, so in all editing of content elements, and in the scheduler module, and the Shift Control S to save and close a document in both Form Engine fields and the scheduler module. So that makes working a bit faster. For the JavaScript technical guys, you can even restrict hotkeys to a single module, or you can have them globally. Like, for example, if you want to open that live search, then it is a global option because you want to use it everywhere. And the other ones that are now defined are restricted to some of the modules where they are relevant. In that last module, that this was already mentioned, but we're going to expand it a bit to a different area. You've seen that you can edit specific columns if you select a few records and have extra fields for them available. Then next to the fields is a little edit button. The same thing is also happening in the file list. There you can also define extra columns, select them from a drop-down, And if you select one or more records, you can say edit a specific metadata, and then you can quickly edit the data for those files. That is often really useful for editors if they see that they have to change the same field for a number of either records or in this case files. Then they just don't have to edit each one separately. That saves them a bit of time. Where was my... The notification container was already there. It was already a big improvement over earlier versions where all those flash message notifications that were temporary just ended up somewhere in the right corner and just disappeared. I don't know if you've been uploading a bunch of files in the file list module, but that was really a mess. Things were happening all over the place, progress bars, flash messages. Okay, the notification container is an improvement that it is one place in the bottom right corner. And it still can be a bit overwhelming. So if there are more than one notification there, there's a clear all button that you can quickly remove everything. It's also scrollable, so you can easily read the notifications that stay there for a bit longer. The link validator also has a nice option with it. If you check links in an installation, then you see a whole list where the problems are. I have broken links, and you could actually edit that page. But it is often that you have a huge page with a lot of content elements, and then you have to find out where that link is used. So now there is an extra button that you can directly edit that content element where the link is. So quickly fix it and you're done. This one is also a cool one. If you've been working with backend user groups, then you've seen that whole long list of tables where you had access to and read access and tables that you can write. There were two separate lists with a lot of checkboxes. And now somebody has taken the trouble to make a nice overview, and you can directly say that it has read and write access or no access to the tables. That goes really quickly. I've tried it for a few things, and well, you're now happy to edit backend user groups. This is also a small category. There were a few things that I couldn't put anywhere else. In the install tool, there's now an option to edit the disable functions that are allowed in your installation. There were a list already in the core, but if you have an installation that has extra functions there, it can be defined. Then there's an option that gives us a bit more speed. This one I take a few more minutes for, because it's actually really cool and really technical, but I'll try to be not technical here. Maybe you've noticed that the requirements for databases have been raised quite a bit. And that has been done for a few reasons. One of them probably comes later. And the other one is that you're now allowed to use a feature in your database that's called a common table expression. And to make it simple, it's more like a subquery that has got a name, and you can use that name as if it were a table. And I'm not going to look at the syntax because there is a lot on the internet to be found about how you write common table expressions. They can be quite complex. You can define more subqueries with a name and use both of them as a table. And it's even possible to create recursive constructions with that. And that can be very useful for a thing like the root line utility. If you want to find the root line, like the breadcrumb that you have in the front end, and normally we would have already the page record for the current page, but then you have to ask for the parent, and then for the parent of that one, and fire a lot of queries to the database and process everything. And now it's possible to do that in a single query, get the results back, and you have the whole list back to the root line. It is even have support to detect if pages are pointing in a circle, because otherwise the query would end forever. That is detected. And it currently has support for workspaces. There is no support yet for language stuff in it, but that will probably be added somewhere in the future. There are new functions for that in the query builder. They are now internal and experimental, and they're also prefixed with TYPO3 underscore to make them at least separate if the query builder from Symfony will have those features in the future, then at least there will be no conflict between function names in there. So for now, it's a bit they're trying out what they can do with it. There are probably plans to use it also in the page tree, and that we can fetch a whole part of the tree of at least a few levels just in one query, and that would speed up everything even more. But for your root line, it's even spectacular if you measure the speed improvements. Fluid also has a few new features in it. The link and URI view helpers can now be used without Xbase. Anywhere else you can make those links. In all these cases that you're using it outside of Xbase, for example, if you use it in the backend in a module that's not Xbase based, then at least you have to supply all the Xbase related parameters. There is no default action, no default controller, etc. Because yeah, it's outside the Xbase context. But at least you can make links to things. This one is a bit more of an internal thing, or if you do a lot of internal Fluid stuff, then you may be useful for you. The variables that you used in Fluid inside PHP were, there was only one variable container, and you had to take care that you remove stuff that you added if it wasn't necessary anymore. Now it's possible to use a variable container that's just for your current scope. If you write really complex view helpers and stuff like that, that may be useful. Also in Fluid, you have the same possibility to use those cache busting parameters. It's by default on, so if you have a link to a static resource and the resource changes your PDF with the root description, then at least the next time the visitors gets the updated one. There are new view helpers, quite a lot. There's a feature view helper. That's just, what it says. It's checks if a feature is enabled or disabled. It's like the if view helper with the same then and else that you can use inside. There's a split view helper that you can split a comma separated list and use each item in a loop. And if you have a split view helper, then you also have a join view helper, indeed. You can join a Fluid array with a separator, and as a bonus feature, there's a different separator for the last item. So you can output something like 1, 2, and 3. This is also one that is requested in a lot of projects, and then people make their own one. The search and replace view helper. It has been made really flexible. You can just use a value for search and replace, or you can supply an array with items to search for and an array to items to replace with. or even use an array with the keys, the value to search for, and the value what the replacement is. And not a few two few helpers indeed that were added were the first and last. So if you have an array with values that was sent to your Fluid template, you can quickly get the first one or the last one. You don't have to create a loop anymore or do a count and difficult things with that. Another one was to fetch some constants from various classes or from PHP. So you can just use the constants that you define in a class. It's often used for IDs for doc types, C types, and all the things that you may want to use, and yeah, for various different constants that are in PHP. At least you can use them everywhere now. Yeah, she is. A crazy feature for the view helpers. They have changed the tag-based view helpers. Now you can just use any attribute in your in the view helper. It is automatically applied to the output. So you don't have to register extra arguments because somebody, or maybe a browser has a new feature that it supports an attribute, or someone wants to use some attribute in their HTML. If it's tag-based view helper, just add it there. It's simply passed to the output. So there's also no call no need to call the register universal tag attributes anymore. Even if you do that, they are added to a different list, the additional arguments instead of the normal arguments list. I'm gonna be a bit later than half past, so I'm using a bit of my extra time, helping hands. Even though I'm going fast, there is still some stuff to cover. I've had it a few times that my log file was getting huge, even so big that there was no room on the device. It was luckily a development environment, but still. There's now a simple rotating file writer. You can say how many times it has to skip to a next file and the number of files it has to keep. Not many features in there, no size or something like that, but at least it helps keeping the size down in your installation. Also, when you're developing the Symfony dependency injection container was, yeah, of course, great to use, but sometimes you need to clean that because you change everything in your code and you get errors because there's still the old situation there, and you have to go into the install tool. If you are in development context, you can just use clear all caches, and also the DI cache is cleared. Oliver also mentioned that enums, a feature for PHP, is used all over the place in the core, and now even Xbase supports them as properties of an entity. So if your model uses something with an enum, then it's just now supported. There were a lot of changes in the configuration of all kinds of classes. Oliver also mentioned a few of those extra attributes, but you can now define a lot of things in the class itself instead of registering something in the services YAML file. For example, if you have an event listener, you can just create a class and add an attribute to it that it is an event listener. You can even use it either on the class itself, then it will use the default __ invoke function, or you can put it that attribute with a function in that class, and then it will call that function. If you're into code, you can now see that it uses those hash as event listener with an identifier that you normally put in your services YAML file, and the event also that was normally in your YAML file. This example has two event listener attributes on one class, so it's used for both. Controllers, they could already been marked as a controller, but Symfony used the syntax with as something. And we've now followed that example. Instead of controller, it's now as controller. And there's forward compatibility for that in version 12. So if you change it to as controller, that's also working there. For the message handlers, there's also an as message handler. There's the as syntax way up again. So there will probably follow a few more attributes in the future, because they are so handy that you don't have to write that whole services file anymore. There were some changes in the database fields. Overall, already mentioned that a lot of the TCA field types are now auto-created. There was a change in there for the datetime fields because people wanted to use dates beyond 2038, and yeah, it's getting nearer and nearer all the time. So it's now auto-created as a big hint so that we have some more room. Yeah, for me it's probably too distant future, but the young people will have dates beyond. Another thing that was a pain in the ass in a few versions. In many databases, you couldn't define a default value for text, blob, and JSON fields. And if you didn't have a value in your insert query for that field, then, for example, MySQL would say, okay, there's no default for it. I'm going to put an error out. You didn't put a value in it. It can't be null. It's now null, and there's no default value. And then you were thinking, yeah, I can't define a default value in MySQL. So what can I do? There was, yeah, you could set some options there and use other workarounds. Since the versions that we now use, MySQL 8 and a bit higher, there's the option to use a default expression. It's not exactly the same as a default value, but you can make an expression that will be used as the default value. So the clever core developers now thought, well, we can misuse that in our debug layer. And if you define a default value in your database configuration, then we'll convert that to a default expression and everybody is happy. Last time when we talked about version 12, don't know if any people were there, we had the feature that the page tsconfig was now auto-loaded from a file. And lo and behold, it's now also possible for the user tsconfig. So actually the methods in the extension management utility are now deprecated because, yeah, they're useless. You can just apply files. I'm gonna skip that one for time reasons. That's not too interesting. Yeah, that's really for programmer stuff who like syntax and stuff like that. Yeah, this one is kind of nice. If you have a foreign table, you can now define the field in that foreign table that has the ID of a group. And then the drop-down box, for example, has then grouped items in it. And because those need labels, you can also define them in TCA, each with the ID that's possible value in that field and a nice label name. Content elements also get automatically registered. If they have a C-type, then there's a registration for it. You don't have to do that explicitly. There's some cleanup there in TCA and then the possible tsconfig. tsconfig is still supported, but mainly for removing things in installations. A nice thing for SQL lovers. The query builder has got a whole bunch of expressions. And just like all the other expressions that you can use, there's now an couldn't find a different name. It's if you pronounce it, so it looks like you're cursing. An S. An expression with an alias. You can concatenate items, cast things to types, and do other things with strings to repeat them, add spaces, cut things left, right, and last but not least, an if expression. Those are also converted to the right syntax depending on which database it's running. So please use them instead of creating a hard-coded query, because then you're just cross-database compatible. If someone uses Postgres, then at least your extension runs nice. So that was quite a boost for the developers. I had one more thing, and that was already nicked in the keynote. So I created another one more thing. That's not available yet in version 13. It's coming probably. It's so far developed now that I think it will make the final version. Editors are a bit overwhelmed with all the fields and options there. So at a few places we already have wizards, like if you translate a page, then you get a wizard. You want to create a translation or a copy, and etc. Various steps. In other places, there are also wizards in place. For the creation of pages and stuff like that, and in the future content elements, there will also be a creation wizard. If you click that one, it's also available in the context menu. Modal pops up and asks you to select the wizard. Well, let's start. Let's create a page. Yeah, I had no choice. It was prepared. You can easily select a page around which one you have to create it. Click the above into or below button, and next you are asked for the title, and you're done. This is helping editors who start with TYPO3 or who are easily overwhelmed with all the options a lot. So I still have a few minutes before coffee break. If you have any questions, or if you find features yourself that I didn't mention. If you're overwhelmed with the whole list of features and the ones that I already removed, I will upload the PDF or the slide set to a few places. I'll publish it in the T3DD channel on Slack, so you get a message there that it is available somewhere. There are, of course, more hidden gems, as I mentioned. If you want to relax after this, I found a movie. I haven't seen it, but maybe it's a relaxing